Hey guys, welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each episode we bring you a new interview with one of the film industry's top directors, conducted by one of their peers. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/The Director's Cut. This episode takes us behind the scenes of Rodrigo Garcia's new film, Last Days in the Desert, a biblical-themed drama that chronicles an untold tale from the story of Jesus. As he fights to survive the harshness of the Judean wilderness during his self-imposed exile of 40 days, he finds himself in a struggle with the devil over the fate of a family in crisis. Ewan McGregor stars as both Jesus and the devil, alongside Ty Sheridan, Kieran Hines, and Ayelet Zura. At a Q&A following a screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Mr. Garcia spoke with director Scott Derrickson about his work on Last Days in the Desert. Listen on for highlights from their conversation, including the casting of Ewan McGregor as both Jesus and the devil, and Mr. Garcia's documentary-esque approach to shooting the film with cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki. Enjoy.
Thank you. I didn't know until first of all, did not see this film until just now with everybody else.
And now you're full of regret.
And oh God, no! I genuinely thought it was amazing. And one of the, just to give a little bit of the history of the project, what little I know about it, and one of the reasons why I'm here. We share the same agent and friend, Adriana Alberghetti, and I was given the script for this, I don't know, 2 years ago, maybe? Was it longer than that?
5 years ago.
5 years ago?
4 or 5.
God, it was that long. Of course, that's how long it takes to get a film like this made. It was the full-length script. The movie changed from what I remember. Some things did and some things didn't, but it was only 60 pages long, and it was a visual treatment, description of it, and there was some dialogue, but not a lot. And I was given it. I think let you talk about it, but about even the reasons for that. But I was really overwhelmed when I read it with the earnestness and the passion that was behind that the endeavor itself, and was very, very much passed on my encouragement to Rodrigo to try to pursue it, to try to get it made, knowing that it would be difficult. Sincerely, the end product exceeded my hopes even for it. I think it's an extraordinary film, and for this kind of movie, an incredible achievement. Let's start by talking about that script and about the inspiration and the background, your background, or what it was that drove you to want to tell this particular kind of story at all.
You know, this was one of those. I just had this idea, and I've said jokingly that I don't know what part of my body it came from. Literally, it was this image of Jesus coming out of the desert, and I guess intuitively I knew he was coming out of the desert after his 40 days, and not feeling like he had completely found what he was looking for, and that he found a father and a son. Then it was only the two of them living in the desert who had a conflict, and I wasn't quite even sure what the conflict was. And that Jesus felt compelled, almost without knowing why, to get involved. I entertained it for a little bit, and I thought, yes, that would be dramatically interesting. And then I couldn't get it out of my head. And then you go through the period where you say, really? You're going to make a movie about Jesus? Okay. But I couldn't get it out of my head. And, and then after a while, you don't have to be a clairvoyant to realize, well, you're talking about fathers and sons. This is arguably the most famous son who's just spent some time in the desert, trying to connect to the oneness, which is his father. And then finding a boy and a father who are in conflict. I wasn't quite sure what it meant. I just thought it was very human for someone to get sucked into that. And I thought, well, would Jesus get sucked into that? And then, So I just couldn't get it out of my head, and I started, taking notes and developing a little more, and then, I wrote the first 20 pages and then the 15 pages. And in the first 15 pages, I made a lot of discoveries. I knew I wanted to keep it very bare bones. And then I needed a mother. I think if I'm going to do like a microcosm of everything, I needed a mother. And also, because the father and the boy don't talk that much, I didn't want a movie that was all built conversations between Jesus and the father and Jesus and the boy. You need another leg. And then finally I realized, I need someone in the movie who knows who Jesus is. And that's when the demon stepped in. But I mean, it literally just, it really came to me. It's one of those, how writers say it doesn't come from you, it comes through you. That was definitely, this is my biggest example of that.
Yeah, I'm almost hesitant to ask more specific questions. I'm going to ask more specific questions about meaning and some of the ideas in the movie. But as a precursor to that, I think this is a perfect example of cinema, quality cinema, great cinema being something that if you could simply state what it means, that you wouldn't need to make the movie, and the greatness of especially cinema that can be considered spiritual, filmmakers like Tarkovsky, who was always striving for kind of spirituality in his filmmaking.
In some ways, a very Christian director.
A very Christian director, and I think that trying to reduce a film like this down to just simple core ideas or a core meaning. If you could just say it, the movie wouldn't need to be made. The movie's greater than that, and that was my experience. I'll be thinking about this for quite a long time. But let's talk about some of the specific choices that you made in it. Why the name Yeshua? I have a background in theology and religious philosophy, which is another reason why I read the pages to begin with. Why that name as opposed to Jesus, and why the demon and not Satan or the devil, and being the more traditional terms?
Because I started writing it with Jesus, and after you write a few pages of Jesus walks, Jesus sleeps, Jesus says, Jesus, the name, the weight crushes you. Do you know what I mean? After a while, I'm like, really? Like every line I was reminding myself of this thing that I was doing, and it was just, it's too portentous, It's like saying, God wakes up and looks out his window. It's like, what? What did you just write? So I said, I need another name, but I don't want to be confusing. So I thought of Yeshua or Yeshua, which is a Hebrew form of the name, which is actually, quite a common name. I think in the Protestant culture, no one names their son Jesus, but as I'm sure you all know, in Spanish, it's quite common to name your son Jesus, which is Joshua. So it just liberated me to call him Yeshua, and just to get, then the first scene he has with the demon says, Yeshua, isn't that what your mother calls you? So it doesn't completely clear it up, but it freed me. And then originally in the first drafts, the demon was called Lucifer. But again, I found it as overwhelming to write, how do you dramatize God, and then how do you dramatize pure evil? So it just helped me sort of bring them down to human scale. In some ways, my scripts don't have much description, but I try to write them very carefully because they all have hidden notes to myself so that I can remember when I'm sure you do that. When you're directing, what it means. And just by calling them Yeshua and the demon, I just brought them down, Jesus and Lucifer. I'm not Dante, for crying out loud. It's like I just needed to bring them down to the human scale. And I think I also did that instinctively because the movie interested me in the human scale. I just wanted to see the human Jesus. At least to treat him, the Jesus in this story I could only see in human terms. So using those two names helped me stay a little bit, not grounded, but feeling that that's the league I could play in. I can play in the Yeshua demon, but not in the Jesus Lucifer.
And it's obviously an exploration of something divine and spiritual, the relationship between God the Father and his son Jesus, and then this very human family and a very human struggle, and both sons being at a similar place, having found themselves, having a sense of what it is that they feel called to do, and the conflict between the expectations of the father, the demands of the father, and one's own desires and one's own instincts, and that's all pretty plain. Did you feel that you were trying to have those things exist on even terms, or did you feel like you were really making a movie more about Jesus, or making a movie more about humanity and fathers and sons and human relationships? Or did you feel, was it really an attempt to do both at the same time and find the relationship between those things?
No, I mean, the attempt was to talk about fathers and sons, and like I said, use this very famous son with a very particular father, for lack of a better term. I thought it was about fathers and sons, and then I have another father and son, and I wanted to keep it all also in a very simple. I wanted the conflicts to be very simple. All the boy wants is to leave. The father wants him to stay. And there's this thing which is, if your mother dies here and we bury her here, we can never leave. I really wanted to make about as bare bones a conflict as I could, but a conflict that was very powerful to them. It felt overwhelming to the boy, for sure. But, to answer the rest of your question, I discovered what I was bound to discover, is that you can say that your movie is about whatever you want, but if Jesus is in your movie is going to be about Jesus. Do you know what I mean? It's or you're not. It's not exclusively about Jesus, but he's not just going to be one of the Uber drivers. Do you know what I mean? It's like. It's like
putting Captain America in your movie.
There are some issues to deal with, and of course, I had 3 days that are not accounted for in the gospel, so I had a lot of freedom. But the origin, and the destiny, and you have to shoehorn your own drama into that, But no, originally it was all a kitchen sink drama in the desert, family, fathers and sons. And perhaps Jesus doing even unconsciously, helping this boy without even knowing why. Again, because I kept thinking of Jesus, of Yeshua, as a person, not because I wanted to say, no, he's not the Son of God, but because the divine side, how do you dramatize that? How do you think about that? We all feel very comfortable when, Morgan Freeman's paternal, protective voice plays God. It's very simple and heartwarming, but the big thing cannot be dramatized. So I just stayed on the human side, and I thought he may not even know why he's helping this boy. But yeah, in the end, it was all Jesus, and yeah. Who am I kidding?
Yeah, I do. As I was watching it, my own experience with it was both very personal and very cinematic. Personally, I lost my father at the same time that my wife was pregnant with my oldest son. And in fact, the first time I ever saw an ultrasound of my oldest, my firstborn son, my first child, was on the day that I buried my dad.
So in Spanish they say "se cruzaron en el camino." They crossed on the road.
Yeah, and
it happens. It's very meaningful.
And my oldest is about to turn 13. My wife and I were just talking about it before this movie, not really knowing what we were in for. So it's very personal. I think people will have very personal reactions to the movie, and of course, everybody has a very personal opinion about the person of Jesus and that name and the idea of Christ, and certainly living in America. And certainly in a political era like ours, where Christianity and the power of Christianity and the power of the Christian church has taken on political significance as well, you can't not have a strong opinion about this figure. The other part of me is a filmmaker. I kept thinking about it, I kept having moments of the movie, and I mean this as a compliment in the highest regard. It really reminded me a lot of Pasolini's The Gospel of St. Matthew and Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ, but being probably the two most personal Jesus films and personally accomplished Jesus films. And I think both films made from a deep place of honesty, as this film was. Did your relationship with that figure change? Your thoughts about the person of Jesus, whether it's as a the historical Jesus. There's a lot of scholarship from the last century about calling into question the veracity of the Gospels. That's a whole subject. Then there's the personal religious aspect. I don't know if you're religious at all. If you're a churchgoer, I am. So everybody has their own. It's to some degree, if you put Jesus up on the screen, it's like a Eucharist. It might be the most meaningful thing in the world to you. It might be a piece of bread and nothing more. So did your beliefs or your feelings about that historical or religious figure alter as a result of making the movie?
Well, I'm not a religious person. I mean, I did grow up, of course, in a Catholic world in Colombia and Mexico and some years in Spain. And my parents were not religious either, but they were, big readers of the Bible and of the Gospels. And they grew up in a world where, that culture. It's funny because over the last 2 or 3 years, I've developed this thing occurred to me. We're very used to hearing some Jews call themselves secular Jews. And I've often thought, well, there are secular Catholics out there. Do you know what I mean? It's like, even if your faith is not even if you're not active in your faith, even if you have doubts, even if you're at war with the church, it is the world that I grew up in. I'm so in that culture, even as an outsider. But an outsider meaning I'm not a churchgoer, but I grew up in that world. And because my dad was a writer, Jesus existed in my head, as well as the historical, the religious, the spiritual side of him. I grew up in a world where Jesus lived in my head, together with anyone and everyone, including Napoleon, Pocahontas, Madame Bovary, Don Quixote. There is a world in your head populated by people, some fictional, some non-fictional, some quasi-fictional, some, Socrates is a guy that has influenced the world. And we have the books that one of his pupils wrote that he said. That's so, 2,600 years ago. It's so removed. It's almost in the realm of fiction. Now, I'm not saying Jesus is fiction, but when I approached the subject, I thought, I'm just working in a world of characters. And then, of course, like I said before, no, it's not a character. It's Jesus, and you have to deal. As far as my ideas of, about Jesus, I could only approach him. Again, I only did the human side, and you have to ask yourself what you ask yourself about every character. If I am him, what? If he is me, what? If I am her, what? I think you have to ask yourself that about every character. And, I threw my own fears and preoccupations on him, and they are mine. They're not his. I have, if I am him, I have the sense of an enormous mission and an enormous destiny that I want, but even if I didn't want it, I wouldn't have a choice. And it's huge. And it will involve, even if I'm not quite sure what it'll involve, it'll have to be a grand gesture, a huge gesture, and potentially dying. And as a human person, I'd be preoccupied and scared. And I don't think, for me, that doesn't take anything away from the human Jesus. After all, if there was no suffering and pain and no fear of death, the sacrifice wouldn't be the sacrifice. He would be a God and go into eternity dancing. But so I tried to think, and I gave him these nightmares that are very common nightmares. He dreams that he's been chased, that he drowns. In the end, he dreams like he's floating in the air. I mean, these are flying, dreaming, flying, swimming, being chased dreams are like, that's like Freud 101. Everyone has had those dreams, And then, the preoccupation, how much can I help these people, or am I meddling? And then ultimately, the question is, should you meddle? He helped the boy achieve his dream, but he also participated in a scheme that, cost the father his life. I mean, it's messy. It's messy. I don't think any of it came from a place of bad intentions, but it was messy.
It was also very surprising and I think very significant, this idea that the demon introduces, this kind of multiverse theory that comes into the movie about these scenarios, the creation repeating itself over and over again, and God altering it just a little bit, just slightly, which fits with some current scientific theories about infinite universes, and that every possible scenario is being played out somewhere in the multiverse. I certainly don't remember that idea from the script that I read, but once that idea was interjected into the movie, I found that to be a very weighty subject in the movie. The idea that that Lucifer is watching all these various realities play out over who knows, and a near infinite amount of time. Was that an idea that carried a lot of weight for you within the story? Because it did for me watching the movie. That happenstance, the happenstance of Jesus coming along at the moment that he did, is what changed everything for this family. And it could have, and it probably hadn't before. There's probably and we know for a fact that in the last time around, this kid poisoned his father. And so I would talk a bit about that, about destiny and the eternal the Nietzschean, eternal recurrence, and all of this stuff that's up there.
I am, clearly one of the the ideas. By the time I was halfway through that draft, I knew there was a big conversation due between the two of them, because the demon had seen things that Jesus had not seen, and I thought, of course, destiny is a big part of it. Can you write your own destiny like the boy wants, or is it pre-written? Can you grow up and be a man, or do you need your father's permission to become a man? And the way parents impact children, and the mother's role in getting the boy out of here. Even at the end, she's dying and she said, go. She burned the body so that no one would be buried there. That was my idea. So, writing the demon was very freeing, because, he starts off that whole scene by saying, I am a liar, that is the truth, which is one of those cyclical lines that it's always biting its tail. Is that the truth or a lie? It's like a coin that's forever. I am a liar, that is the truth. And that really freed me, because I knew that anything that came out of his mouth could finally be interpreted as a way to destabilize Jesus. There is not one world, there are many. You're not one son, there are many sons. Your father doesn't love you and doesn't have a plan. He is someone who is only self-involved and is perfecting this universe in a neurotic way. I didn't feel like I would offend anyone, because this is Lucifer screwing with your head. And yet the idea of the multiple universes, sort of satisfied that sort of my literary inclination towards the story. This is a story that can be written many ways. And it also, it's from a theological point of view, it's all a lie, but the demon is using it. And then, like you said, it sort of, hints at physics. They say that there are many universes going on, and there are some universes where, this movie will do really well at the box office.
Yeah.
So, anything is...
There's some of us wish we were in there. Somewhere this is beating Civil War this weekend.
Right now, and I'm young and thin, and it's still just beautiful. But I was asked to talk, at the writers, at the Academy to some young writers, and I had to give a speech that drove me nuts. And then I said, okay, 2 stories. Tell me one is easier to believe. There was nothing, and in 6 days God made the world. Or the other one, there was nothing, and a huge explosion created everything. And on one of those planets, dinosaurs developed. Then an asteroid hit the Earth, destroyed the dinosaurs, and little furry creatures turned into humans. Okay? Religious or science, those are both 2 insane stories, and the only way we can assimilate them is through story and storytelling. Are we really supposed to believe that the electron, you don't know where it is, it's only, or that there are parallel universes and the black hole? It's, only story can help you digest that. So I thought, well, I'll have Lucifer tell Jesus a mind-boggling theory to further make him insecure.
I love that answer. I do think that one of the great accomplishments of the film is, unless you're some sort of really extremist in your atheism or your belief, I don't think that the movie.
I'm a God-fearing atheist.
Well, you managed to make a movie that is really wonderfully free of. It's not addressing things, and it's not presented in a way that really is going to offend anybody. It's outside of that, because I think it's so immersed in mystery, and it is about the mystery of life and the mystery of the forces that guide us, and in our relationships, in our spiritual beliefs or lack of, or doubts or whatever. And I think that's probably my favorite thing about it. I want to talk a little bit about the aesthetics of the movie, and how much I think that served this story that you told, and the both the spiritual side of it and the very human drama of the family. Your director of photography, obviously one of the great DPs in the world, who's just he'll win the Oscar this year for The Revenant, I'm sure. I wonder. I really wonder about the conversations that you had, and going into this, because it is one of the. First of all, it is one of the more distinctive and better looking daylight exterior digital films I've ever seen. It might be the best looking daylight digital exterior film I've seen, and not only in terms of just quality and the pleasantness of looking at it, but the way the austerity of that color palette and the photography, the compositions, and everything serviced the tale. I'd love for you to just talk a bit about your relationship with your DP and how what you were striving for in shooting this.
Well, it was all very organic, and first of all, we know each other socially, and I didn't know Chivo that much growing up in Mexico because he's 6 years younger than I am, but I knew of him. I remember being 20 and seeing him playing in a band when he was 15 at a party. So we've known each other for a long time. And then in the 90s, I was his operator. So I was I knew very much how he worked, and
I was blanking his name. What is his name again?
Emmanuel Lubezki.
That's right. Okay, yes. Sorry.
Yeah. And he and then he shot the first movie that I did, which was already like 15 years ago. And then we hadn't worked for a long time, but I always wanted him to shoot this movie. I just knew that I needed a major eye and a major artist, and my idea for it, I'm not someone who says, oh, it has to be this way. I know what it cannot be. I knew it couldn't be desert postcards. The desert is so generous that you can just make this whole, corny thing out of it. I wanted it to be beautiful, but also have a harshness. And then, the rest of the stuff, we don't, and I don't think he does this with I was going to say other directors. I think it's been 10 years since he's done a movie with anyone other than, Alfonso Cuarón, Alejandro, and Terry Mal. I mean, a long time, maybe even 12 years. So I don't think we didn't sit down and look at movies. We didn't reference movies. We sort of wanted it to come out of those conversations you have in the van, and then you look at one location, and a lot of it actually came out of an initial meeting we had with Judiana Makovsky, the wardrobe designer, who, out of the conversation, it became clear that, not clear, these things, but you forget. Jesus and his followers were very poor people. And when you're seeing someone come out of 40 days in the desert, I mean, it's a homeless man and a very poor man and a meditator. And I think a lot of our ideas about the movie came from looking at some of the stuff that she showed us that were, pictures from the 1890s and the 1880s of people who lived in the desert, or Bedouins, or people from other countries and other cultures. But that poverty, seemed to be essential. And then one day, Chivo said to me, look, we only had 25 days and $3 million to make the movie. He said, if we go out there with lights and 20 by 20 silks, we're never going to get done. So we just agreed to shoot it, like a documentary almost. It's handheld, Steadicam, and then on a tripod sometimes, but seldom, or a tripod without a head, just sort of. We didn't have a dolly. We had no lights. I mean, we did light, the interior of the tent. That's one day. And so what that required was, I spent a lot of time, even before Chivo was available, I combed that park, and I chose this park because it was so peculiar looking. I didn't want to park like, parks in Utah or Colorado, or they look like Westerns. This is its own thing.
And where is it?
It is Anza Borrego. It's about 4 hours from here, 2 hours east of San Diego. I combed the park, and then I showed him all the locations, and then we narrowed down what worked best. And then we literally planned it, this scene in this direction at this hour, the reverse in this direction really, like, so that we always knew what time we were shooting what. I mean, it was extremely organized. Occasionally we'd see something better and move over or reinvent. But it's shot like a documentary, but super thoroughly planned.
Was a lot of that avoiding direct high sun shots? Because, certainly like at the end, you see the long shadows of them on the desert. And I felt like there was a lot of deliberate attempts to get things at the beginning and the end of days to avoid the harshness that digital photography gives you with the high sunlight.
I mean, we did shoot some stuff, not at 1 p.m., but we would shoot, up to around noon. And then after 2:30 or 3, so we couldn't have the luxury of having 4 hours down or 5 hours down in the middle of the day. But even that we planned. That was something. The middle of the day we would go inside the tent and work with the mother. That's the kind of stuff we would do. But I think to your point about the digital stuff, my feeling, and I never discussed this with Chivo, is Chivo's he's conservative and super adventurous. Both, a lot of artists are like that. What you like, you have your theories, you have your vision, you have your stuff, and then you say, oh my God, I got to loosen up here. And my feeling is, and he'd done a lot of this stuff on Terry Malick's movies he'd done, but I think he knew that sooner or later he was going to have to make that digital day exterior sun. And you know what I mean? And like, why be running away? He's not someone who's turning the clock back. He's very, he loves film, but I know, for example, he was never happy with with the positives on film. The print film he was never happy with. He liked the negatives. And then the digital, of course, has a few problems. You know, you can never see the sun; it always burns out. At least in camera 2 years ago. But then you have this thing that the movie looks the same in every screen, everywhere. You know, you never get that print that's too green and too blue and too whatever. So I have the feeling he knew this was going to happen sooner or later, and here this is it. This is one. So he really, I mean, when I say no grip electric, we had no foam core. There's no 4x4 on anyone's face. There is nothing.
Yeah, and it was it was an education for me too, and just the way that we were pushing it all cooler. It was shot on the Alexa, is that right?
Shot on the Alexa, yeah.
And which is a warmer camera, but the way it serviced the story, and the way that it presented an aesthetic that was really pure, and was worthy of this kind of work of art.
I just want to say to your question, he did say at one point, and of course it terrified me because, as a director, we're all incredibly pretentious. He said, we have to find a very humble look for the movie. And my first thought was, the movie's not humble. What? But you know what he meant? It was like that nothing in the movie can be beautiful as well as harsh, but nothing should be showy. Nothing should be like, look what we did.
I think that's a really wonderful thing that he said, because I think there is the movie has a humbleness. There's humility in the aesthetics of the movie, and in the performances of the movie, and certainly in the storytelling and what I think the areas that you were exploring in it. And I think Ewan McGregor's performance was really a terrific example of an actor servicing two parts very well and very distinctively, and I think he could have gone extreme with either of those roles, much more than he did, and yet there's still extremities in them, and I think he serviced them very well. So talk about the casting of him and the decision of him. Why him? I think it's worth noting that he's not just a white guy; he's a white blue-eyed guy, playing this Mediterranean character, but also playing the demons. I'm very curious about the process of how you found him and what it was about him as an actor that you felt was right to play these two roles.
Well, I initially didn't think of him because, like old directors, sometimes the vision is too narrow. And I thought, at this time, Jesus was around 30. So I wanted an actor that was, 30 to 34. And Ewan is a little older. He was 42 or 43 already. So he was never on those lists, and those, I never considered him. And then the movie went through many, at one point I was going to do it in Israel in Hebrew. Then I was going to do it in Israel in English. Then I was going to do it in Israel in, whatever. And when I was going to do it in Hebrew, it was going to be with, actors from Israel. There were, two Israeli actors and some Israeli-Palestinian actors also. And then I thought of making it in Mexico and making it in Spanish. And then it was different reasons it couldn't be done. Mexico security, Israel cost, whatever. And then by chance, or maybe not by chance, 4 families went, my family was one of 4 families that ended up spending a holiday together at the beach in Mexico. And it was Chivo who knew Ewan and invited us, so we all got to know each other. And spending time with him, I started thinking, oh my God, this guy would be great. But I said, I've just become friends with him. There's no way I'm going to get back to LA and say, oh, by the way, here's my script. So I said, forget it. And a month went by, and then my producers called me and said, you should really think about Ewan. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to send Ewan my script. So they sent him the script behind my back. Once I got a call saying he's reading the script, I thought, okay. And he liked it right away, responded, said yes, went for it. Apart from being a very good actor, which I already knew, and very smart and just someone who communicates, like all good actors, a lot of inner life, a lot of intelligence, a lot of feeling. I thought he just communicates this enormous empathy. He's very much interested in the other and in the other human person, and that was, that I thought if anything, if there was anything that you needed from someone playing Jesus, is that interest in the other. I mean, that's what Christianity is, right? Yeah. The other.
It's what it's supposed to be.
Yes,
yeah.
I mean, at least in its tenets, it's the other. So I was convinced it was him. Regarding his race, yes, I'm Latino, so I am as sensitive to that, to that just cause as anyone else. But I ultimately found the guy that I thought would, not be too poised, too cocky, too meek, too, it's hard to get movie stars to play certain things, Look, even the looks, we threw as much on him as we could, and the more we did, the better he looked. Yeah. It's like, wow, okay. So I'm aware of the racial thing, and I can only plead guilty and say I understand it, and if it pisses anyone off, all the power. But as a director, I found my most human Jesus, who sang it in the key that I needed, and I went for it, and I think his work is great in it. To your point of the Jesus and the demon, he, as it turns out, only thought of Jesus. And literally on the Saturday, 2 days before shooting on Monday, he realized he had not for a moment thought how he was going to play the demon. But the demon was written, his dialogue is, it's showy. Do you know what I mean? He's a show-off, and he has humor. And so I think he just sort of fell into that. That was almost no work for him. The work for him was, Jesus, who on the page was very silent, very introspective, watching, making choices for sure. But in fact, sometimes in the script it worried me that the demon read better. And then when we were shooting, it was so much fun to watch him. Chief was like, "Oh my God, we're in trouble. You're gonna have to cut this out." And I'm like, "Well, we'll see." And then when you cut the movie together, the Jeshua side of it is very strong. But when you're reading it or shooting it, it's the demon show. He has all the good lines.
Yeah, I think it's a much greater accomplishment than it's. But now that you're saying that, it's a much greater accomplishment than it even occurred to me in watching the movie. That he has so much fun and relishes that demon role, and yet the Yeshua role stands. I still felt like that's who I was with. That's whose story you were telling, and who I felt very connected to. But I thought that it was also I thought a beautifully delicate take on the demon character. I like the fact that you call him the demon and not the devil. I think just because there's a general point of view that he represents, which has some credibility, and that I didn't find him to be, arch, and I felt there were quite a few moments when he was saying things that I've heard spoken very earnestly, by people who talk about why they don't believe in God or why they're disillusioned with religion, those sorts of things. And I thought that was one more layer of contribution to the religion and spirituality in the movie. And the boy, where did you find him? He's terrific.
Yeah,
is he
Ty Sheridan? Yeah, I mean, he's in a lot of movies now and about to be in many more. He was one of the 3 boys in Tree of Life. And then after that, he did Mud.
Oh, that's where I knew him from. I knew I'd seen him.
And he was very good, and he's just one of those boys, like the boy from Room, or or Dakota every 1, 2, 3 years, just these kids come along that just are good and enjoy it, and And he's very good, and he's nonstop. He's about to be in the X-Men and to do Spielberg's next movie. So, those other three grown-up actors are extremely experienced. So yeah, I mean, sometimes I would talk a little more to the boy, but he's still a very good actor. I mean, I couldn't possibly say anything like I directed him or got a performance out of him. He just understood it and just was very good.
I would love to, especially because it's a room full of directors. I would love to hear a bit about the process of getting a film like this all the way to the screen. I didn't read any reviews, but I saw that the movie's been very well reviewed. I think it was like at 78% on Rotten Tomatoes when I looked it up tonight, so congratulations on that.
I only remember a couple of painful reviews.
Yeah, okay. Well, but overall, they're clearly positive. I think the movie's amazing, and I still was sitting there in my seat toward the end, just marveling that in this day and age you got this movie made at all. So I'd love, and like you said, it was, it was 4 or 5 years ago that I first read that script. That's a long time to be striving to get something done. That you shoot in 25 days, and it's a low budget movie, but $3 million is still a lot of money in the real world, and getting that kind of money back is a challenge. So I'd love to hear about a little bit about that process and if it was as hard as I would think it would be to get this done.
Yes, I mean, absolutely, and I always knew it, and in fact, I had long thoughts before even sitting down to write it. And then I wrote the first third, and I got stuck. And over a year, I thought, do you really even want to put the emotional thing that you have to sort of vomit into a script? Do I want to go there for a movie that will probably never get made? But in the end, things get under your skin, and I just finished it. And then when I finished it, I was even more convinced I had to make it. All the while knowing that it was a completely personal, I was making the movie for me, and I just knew what it was going to be. I had no illusions. But, we sort of reached this number, which was, 25 days is probably around 3 million. And, and also, I mean, without someone like Ewan or a name like Ewan, it just would not have happened, And even so, you've got to go out and Ewan playing 2 roles. Maybe if it was Ewan playing 1 role, right. That, then you have to do it for 2 million. And then you go out and, it's a little bit of pre-sales and a little bit of, and a lot of private investors. I mean, I can only be thankful. The producers Julie Lynn and Bonnie Curtis and Wix Walker, they went out there and literally, the loaves and the fish come to mind. I don't know how they, how they did it, but I'm very thankful. I mean, it's insanely difficult to make any drama, let alone this kind of movie, which is also a little trapped between art house and Christian. If it was a more overtly Christian movie, well, then that market is very juicy potentially. And as an art house movie, I think it would have had, maybe traveled more. It is distributed in other countries, but for example, it didn't go to too many festivals, even festivals where I'd taken every one of my movies. In very secular worlds like Europe, it was like, it's just some Jesus movie from America. They thought it was coming with Ted Cruz carrying it or something. But I mean, it was done like you can imagine, beg, borrow, and steal, and 25 days, 3 million. It's, I don't even know how we made it. It's another reason I shot it near LA, because then I could get people we still had to put people up, but we weren't saying to someone, we're going to Sonora for 3 months, or we're going to, the Judean desert.
Yeah. Well, that's that's just one more of the fine lines I think that this movie walks. So many ways that it could have gone wrong, creatively, and in this case, we were talking about it. It's not an overtly Christian movie, a religious movie, and because the subject matter, it's an interesting fit even for art house cinema. But I think that's where its greatness lies. I think that's all the time that we have, so I'm going to wrap it up there. But thank you so much for the movie. It's
Thank you
really
very
wonderful.
much.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. Remember, you can watch a video of past Q&As on our website or our YouTube channel. We also have preview podcast episodes from earlier this season. And stay subscribed to The Director's Cut for more Q&As and highlights from other DGA events, as well as selections from our archive. Also on our website, you can explore our visual history program with long-form, oral history interviews that delve deep into the careers of veteran DGA members. Check out the program at dga.org/craft/visual history. If you're enjoying The Director's Cut, please subscribe to it on iTunes, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you won't miss an episode. And leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks for listening and have a great week. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.